For this lesson, we're going to be continuing on with our different factoring methods. And for today, we're going to be focusing on factoring in the form ax squared plus bx plus c. And how this is different from last lesson is that our a value does not have to be 1. All of the work from 4.6 only works when a equals 1. For this lesson, a can be anything. This does also work if a equals 1. The method from last lesson is significantly more efficient, but if you can't remember it, you can also use this. So the method we're going to work on is called the decomposition method. And the decomposition method has 4 main steps. The first step is to multiply a and c, and then we want to find two numbers that add to b and multiply to ac. Then we're going to split the middle term using the two numbers that you found, and then we're going to factor by grouping. Now those instructions sound very, very confusing, so we're going to work on putting it into practice, and the more we practice with it, the clearer those instructions will become. So for our first example, 2x squared plus x minus 6. We're going to approach this very similar to how we were approaching everything last lesson. We're going to first identify our b. So again, make sure that your terms are all in order of largest exponents to smallest exponents. So I've highlighted my b pink, and now I'm going to highlight my a and my c. Now this is the part that gets a little different from last lesson. So this part's going to stay exactly the same. We need to find two numbers that add to our middle number. So the coefficient on that middle number is just a 1. Now here's where things get a little different. Now we want to find two numbers that multiply to a times c. So in this case, our a value is 2, our c value is negative 6. So we're looking for two numbers that multiply to negative 12. So two numbers that add to b, and two numbers that multiply to a times c. So that's going to be our setup for all of these. So now we're going to start looking for our numbers. Remember that it's significantly easier to look for our multiplication numbers first. So I'm going to think of all the options of numbers that multiply to 12. So I have 1 and 12. Can I get 1 from that? No. I have 2 and 6. I can't get 1 from that either. But I have 3 and 4. I can add or subtract those to get 1. So they need to add to positive 1 and multiply to negative 12. So 4, negative 3, 4, and negative 3. So now we have our numbers. Now we're going to use them. So if we think about when we are expanding, we always need to collect like terms. Now what we're going to be doing here is we're basically going to be doing that backwards. So instead of collecting like terms, we're trying to figure out what the like terms were before they were collected. So in this case, because we know that 4 and negative 3 equal 1, instead of writing a 1 in front of our x, we can write a 4x and a negative 3x. So all I've done here is instead of writing this 1, I've broken it up into 4 and negative 3. If you look at this, we can combine 4x minus 3x and get 1x, but our goal is to figure out what those numbers were before we collected like terms. Once we've done that, we are going to factor by grouping. So we've done that before. Now we're going to group our pairs. And the nice thing about this is if you already had your variables rearranged properly from the very beginning, you don't need to worry about rearranging anymore. So now I'm going to common factor as much as I can out of each pair. And now, similar to our common factoring, I notice that my brackets match. That means I've done it correctly. So I'm going to factor out that bracket, bring it out to the front, and I'm left with 2x minus 3. And remember, if you have extra time, we can always check our answer by multiplying it all out. And if we get the same thing, we know we've done it right. So that's the first example. We're going to do a bunch of these together to help you understand the steps. So for B, we're going to approach it the same way. We're going to start by identifying our A, our C, and our B. And now I need to find two numbers that add to B and two numbers that multiply to A times C. So in this case, our A is 2 and our C is 5. So two numbers that multiply to 10. So now I'm going to think of my numbers. So I always start with thinking of all the pairs of numbers that multiply to 10. So I have 1 and 10. Can I get 11? Yes. 1 and 10, 1 and 10. So now what I'm going to do is now instead of writing 11x, we're going to use that 1 and that 10. Now if you had written them in a different order, so 10x and then 1x, everything would have worked out as well. So the order of that part doesn't matter either. So now we're going to factor by grouping again. So I separate my expression into two groups, and now I'm going to common factor as much as I can out of each group. So for the first group, I can common factor an x, and for the second group, I can common factor out a 5. Now I have matching brackets, which is a really good sign. It means I've done it correctly. So we can common factor out that bracket, and we have our final answer. All right, next example. So again, first thing we always do, identify our variables. So that is B, and then we have C and A. So we need two numbers that add to B and two numbers that multiply to A times C. So in this case, we have 6 times 2, which is 12. So we're going to look for our numbers. Our factors of 12 are 1 and 12. That doesn't work. 2 and 6. That doesn't work. 3 and 4. That does work. So I have 3 and 4. And because it's -7, they both have to be negative. We have 3 and 4. Now in my equation, instead of writing that -7, I can use my numbers. Then I'm going to factor by grouping. Oops. -2. X minus, oops. Sorry about that. 2x minus 1. And I have matching brackets, so I can factor out that bracket. We'll do a few more together. So for D, our next step, oops, find my A, B, and C. And we need to find two numbers that add to B and two numbers that multiply to A times C, which in this case will be 4 times -3, which will be -12. So if I think of all my options for negative 12, I have 1 and 12. That doesn't work. 2 and 6. We can get 4 from 2 and 6. 2, negative 6, 2, and negative 6. And now instead of writing that negative 4, I'm going to use my 2 and my negative 6. Then I'm going to group my terms, and I will factor by grouping. So we'll common factor as much as we can out of here. And now they both have a 2x plus 1 in the bracket, so that's a good sign. So I can factor out that 2x plus 1, and I'm left with 2x minus 3. So that is basically our steps for decomposition. So what I want you to do is I want you to try the next few and check your answers. This stuff does seem confusing at first, but the more you practice, you're going to get better and better at it, and it will start to become very, very natural. Understanding how to do decomposition is one of the most important things for grade 11, so we want to practice and practice and practice and make sure that we all feel very confident with our factoring skills.